When I was a child, the Sisters of St. Benedict from Bismarck always came out to teach summer catechism for 2 weeks. That's how I got to know them. And I remember particularly a couple of the sisters who asked me about my vocation. Well, of course, when I was in 3rd grade, I was going to be a sister right away. And then when I was in 6th grade, apparently I said I was going to be a sister. But after that, nil. I didn't think that was going to be for me at all.
My only reference for sisters or nuns were The Sound of Music, which I liked a lot, and Sister Act, which I loved a lot. I had the soundtrack and I knew all the songs, and I just loved that movie.
During the Eucharistic prayer, while the priest was consecrating the host and the wine, and I was thinking to myself, I wish I could be that intimate with God as the priest was, in that moment. And kind of just a moment later, God, I believe, hearkened back and said, I want you to be that close also, and consider religious life. Although it was very puzzling at that time because I was in the middle of taking care of my mom. She was battling cancer, and then also I was a full-time student.
And I realized a couple things in college. One, as I sort of went back to my faith, one is that the Catholic Church cares about poor people. I had never heard of Catholic social teaching, so I didn't know anything about that. So I was happy to hear that, and I became more involved that way through social justice. And the other thing is that I like that community, that tight community at the Newman Center that I had found in my family growing up, and that I would later find in a Benedictine community. But I still didn't know any sisters, any nuns. I just didn't know any.
And the pastor called me one evening, and after our religion class, and he said, "Have you ever thought of being a sister?" And I said, "Well, of course." And he said, "Well, you better look at that."
I first was interested in religious life when I finished high school, but the priest, Father Fian, discouraged me. He said, "You're too young." So I went into nurses training.
I was in my 50s, and I was a widow. I'd been previously married. I have 5 children, all grown and gone, and lots of grandchildren.
I kind of put off what God was asking me to do. And my priest, I had sought advice from him, and he said, "Well, I think you might want to continue on your professional career as you're going, because if it's a genuine calling, God will definitely bring it back up."
And so I had a profession that they wanted in the military. So I decided to join the Navy. And it was the Navy so I wouldn't have to go overseas because I didn't want to be on the front line.
So I was just exploring a little bit. As I was doing that, I graduated from Morehead State with a history degree, non-teaching. Not much you can do with that. So I had to go to grad school, so I went to NDSU. And 2 things happened while I was there. One is that I started dating someone. Another grad student. We met in the library, and we were both nerds, with these big library grad projects. And so he asked me out. I said sure, because I was just kind of discerning, which is good. And so after that first year of grad school, he asked me to marry him. But let me backtrack a little. Also during that year, I met Sister Kathleen from this community, and she was the vocation director at the time.
I met a sister, and she just latched onto me, and we just became friends. And during the summer, I shared my life, and I shared my story with her and my experience at that particular Mass at the Immaculate Conception.
So I came back to Bismarck. My family is here in Bismarck. We've lived in Bismarck for many, many years. And so I contacted the sisters at the hospital and wondered if they would be interested in new members.
Well, he said, "We'll take a trip to Bismarck so you can meet the sisters there." So we did, and he planned that trip on a day when there was a reception of sisters into the novitiate.
And I met all these normal, fun people that were sisters. And I thought, I didn't know sisters were like this because I still had the Sister Act idea in my head. None of them were wearing habits, but it wasn't really that which drew me. It was something more, or which I noticed, it was something more inside them, which now I call the sister joy.
When I first came up here, it was just like I had come home. The hospitality I received from the sisters was just overwhelming, and I just could see myself growing old with them. And I could see myself getting closer to God here.
So I spent a lot of time in the Fargo Cathedral, which is near NDSU where I was going. They have perpetual adoration, so I could go in any time and just sit there and say, I don't know, God, what should I do?
I had lots of advice, and one of the pieces of advice I received was to grieve first before seriously discerning religious life, because the call came to go a little deeper and a little further within the first year after my husband died, and that was too soon.
Eventually, I obviously decided not to marry him. Not so I could run off and be a sister, just obviously I wasn't in love with him the same way, is what I decided eventually. So that was tough. I didn't, like I said, right after that, I didn't join the monastery. We don't actually want women who are right off a romantic relationship. It's not a good thing usually.
So these young women, there were 4 or 5 of them who were received into the initiate at that time. And that was it for me. I talked to the priors at that time. I talked to a couple of the other sisters. And I came in that fall. After I graduated in May, I was here in September, ready to start.
That call followed a lot of exposure to the Benedictine charism. I was what they called an oblate. And an oblate is a lay person who attaches to a particular Benedictine monastery in service and doing what they call an oblation. It's a promise to live the Benedictine way of life in your state of life as you are.
I really liked the Benedictine charism once I discovered it. This was the first one I visited. I like that community feel and that we do it together.
I'm a community person. We came from a big family, and that helps make community life easier because you're used to different kind of people with different type of ideas.
I gathered everybody at Christmas time, and each one of them was very affirming. It just was something that they said, well, Mom, you're always at church anyway. This is just kind of a logical progression. And so it was something that I needed to hear from them.
God has ways of working through different people, and God has ways of working through different situations, and the call may come when you're least expecting it. But the call will come if you are really to be a member of a community.
But that call, that idea to become a sister, just kept returning year after year, literally. So I think persistence is sometimes part of it. Give it a little time, and if God keeps tugging on your heart that way, it always pays to look into it. So I'm glad I did.